Let me ask you, how many minutes is your circle of limitation? So when I decided to move to Florida from New Hampshire when I was 23, everyone that I told had something pessimistic or discouraging to say. I heard, "You'll be back," or "It's so hot down there, you're gonna roast." Or what about, "There are old people everywhere," or "The water at the beach gets so warm it's not even refreshing." And geez, I've heard the traffic is terrible. So everyone had negative things to say. Everyone except for this one guy that responded more honestly. And when I mentioned that I was moving to Florida, he paused for a moment, reflectively, and then he said, "I wish I had the balls. I've always thought about moving south to get away from these horrendous winters, but the truth is, I'm just too much of a chicken." And in that moment, I thanked him for his honesty. And I told him that what I had just realized was that most of the rest of the people that I told who had reacted with negativity had probably also always thought about moving south, but that unlike him, they couldn't face the truth. The truth is that they avoided acknowledging their desire for a better life, or at least a warmer one, out of fear. They limited themselves to avoid the discomfort of change. And so my brazen and abrupt move to the other side of the country without a job or a house or a nest egg threatened their tightly held belief that they clung to, that it wasn't possible. And it might have been crazy, but it was definitely possible. So after the winter that we had just experienced, with practically zero snow and temperatures so cold that they closed the schools for cold, the only thing that I saw as crazy was living through another year in a frozen hell. And I distinctly remember the moment that I made my decision. It was February, and the little snow that we had had was melting, and a patch of brown and crumpled grass was showing through. And I saw a small, green little baby sprout reaching towards the sun. And I empathized with its hunger for the light. I felt compassion for the months that it had spent trapped beneath the frozen earth. And I felt the relief of breaking through. And I realized it was not the plight of the sprout that I was empathizing with. It was me. Never again is what I said to myself in that moment. And I meant it. Fear of the unknown or not, I was not about to submit myself to further torture within a self-inflicted boundary of a state. And so I arrived in Florida on April 1st. But I can assure you, it was not I who was the fool. Because 13 years later, I'm still here. I live at the beach, and all of those people's fears were totally bogus, especially the one about the warm water. Because I can tell you, 88-degree Gulf Beach water is like a saltwater spa. It's heaven. Stop lying to yourself. And so the other day, I was in the Florida Keys celebrating my birthday with my husband and my daughter on a snorkeling trip. And on my way there, we stopped to visit family. And at our hotel, the attendant asked where we were from and what we were there for. When we said that we lived 4 hours away and that we were just in town for the night and then we were heading to the Keys, he mentioned that he had always wanted to go to the Keys, but that anything over an hour away was just too far. Now, mind you, from the hotel to Key Largo, where we were going, was a little more than 90 minutes south. So I thought to myself, too far for what? For experiences worth having? For opportunities and beauty and adventure? For life to exist? And it reminded me of the limited mental boundaries that I once held for myself. You see, after moving to a giant state like Florida, I realized that most people in small states develop what I call small state mentality. Because for some reason, there seems to be a psychological boundary around the actual literal boundary of one's home state. And for whatever reason, it feels really weird to cross it. In Florida, I found myself driving 3 or 4 hours away without even questioning it, which I found really odd when I thought about it, because when I lived in New Hampshire, it felt absurd to drive to Boston, which was only an hour away. Or New York City, which was 2 states away, was only 4 hours away. But yet, I never would have thought of going, which was definitely my loss. But in Florida, you can drive 8 hours and still be in Florida. And this really helped me see things differently. So this hotel attendant reminded me that it isn't just people who inhabit small states who develop this mental boundary. It's everyone, except other people's boundaries are usually a certain driving distance. And it seems so normal for me to drive long distances to experience places that I'd like to go. that it always surprises me when I meet people who live out their entire lives within a 1-hour radius. And for some, it's only a 20-minute radius. I find it creepy. And even creepier are the people who live within their radius in the same town that they grew up in. Eek! I simply can't imagine living such a limited life. These mental, physical boundaries are a perfect example of self-inflicted limits. So whether it's a state or a certain distance from home, these boundaries are ultimately meaningless. I challenge you to ask anyone, yourself included, what reason they have for not wanting to go beyond whatever boundary they've set for themselves. And I assure you, there will be no legitimate reason. What could the reason possibly be? That sitting in a car is just too painful to do for more than 20 minutes or an hour? That slight discomfort or boredom are simply too much to bear? That their brain will explode if they drive too far? That they have an irrational fear of being chased by rabid baboons? Like, what the hell is it? Why don't they want to go further? The only legitimate reason I can think of is it's that they fear that they might actually experience something beyond that boundary that challenges their belief that their life is what they want and that everything that they could ever need or love exists within this 20-minute radius. So again, what is your boundary of limitations? Is it 20 minutes? 60? Is it 4 hours? Do you have one? What about with regard to your job? Will you only work somewhere within 20 minutes of your house? It's understandable if you don't want to waste your time commuting. But what if your absolutely ideal dream job was 45 minutes away? Would enjoying what you spend 8 hours a day doing be worth spending an extra hour on the road? Or what if you're happy with your job, but your dream beach house became available at a price that you just couldn't refuse? Would it be worth driving an hour each way to spend your time at home listening to the waves lap upon the shore, watching the sunset, and swimming when you want to? Life is a toss-up. You have to choose between your time and the quality of how you spend your time. Or you can completely rethink this whole thing like I did and create your own job and work from home at the beach. The truth is that you have a choice, but that you don't allow yourself the full range of options because you create imaginary boundaries of limitation. Stop it. I didn't spend a couple days on vacation in the Keys because I have the money and flexibility to do it. I have the money and flexibility to do it because long ago I made a decision to expand my boundaries. At a time when my peers were settling in with their small state mentality and setting up lives that operated within a 20 to 60 minute radius, I was driving across the country with all my possessions and my cat in tow. And at a time when money was tight, I prioritized experiences over disposable pleasures like Starbucks, clothes, and useless possessions. And at a time when most young adults were climbing the bottom rungs of their chosen career path of stability and comfort, I was cliff diving into a path of entrepreneurship and its resulting uncertainty and freedom. Now, I'm not saying I think that there's anything wrong with being happy with where you live and living a simple life. I'm just saying that it's one thing to stay living in your hometown, but it's another thing to never leave. I think people don't explore because they fear that life beyond their chosen boundary may reveal that they may be missing out on something. Lack of exposure to the outside world is the best way to ensure you never question the authenticity of your satisfaction with your life. I understand. Humans are comfort-seeking beings. We want life to be pleasant. But we try so hard to control the world around us that we limit it to only what we know. But then, within that narrow path of certainty, we make ourselves miserable. The monotony of our mediocrity highlights every slight disruption. When every day is like the one before, we seek the variety and novelty that we crave through conflict, drama, or substance abuse. Ask yourself, have you lived 20 years of life? Or have you lived 1 year 20 times? If this sounds like you, I'm going to tell you one thing you've been trying to avoid hearing, that you have a choice. Every day since the beginning of your chosen limitations, you have had a choice to be different. You have always had the option to cross the boundary, to move it, or to demolish it. And every day going forward, you will still have this choice. You can say yes to life. You can get in the car and drive farther than you ever have before. You can sit down and think about what you really want, but that you've told yourself you can't have, or a place you can't go, or that you can't do something. You can spend your money differently. You can spend your time differently. You can stop hiding behind comfort and conformity and obligation. And if you're one of those people who loves your hometown and wants to raise your kids and grow old where your roots are planted, then do it. Every community needs established families to keep tradition and culture alive. But don't do it out of fear or obligation. Many people use this famous quote by George Moore as an excuse to stay put. And it says, "A man travels the world over in search of what he needs and returns home to find it." To which I reply, sometimes. More often, those who explore find themselves and what they need and love through exposure to people who think differently than they do, through finding beauty and meaning in the experiences and places that they didn't know existed. The truth is, most people who leave don't return home. And those who do return home and find that after all, what they always wanted was right where they began. But they first had to travel the world over in order to realize it. Or at least leave their state. So you've never heard anyone say that staying within a 1-hour radius was the greatest decision I ever made. So take the risk. It's the only way that you're ever going to know that the only true risk is staying stuck where you are, in the prison of your own making. Only you hold the key. You always have. Now it's time to stop limiting yourself with imaginary boundaries. You're free to go.